Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're going to continue on in Unit 5, Agriculture and Rural Land Use. So what we've been discussing for the last several videos is different types of agricultural practices, talking about subsistence and commercial forms of agriculture. Today we're going to get on a little bit more practical level and talk about farm locations. Why are certain farms found in certain spots of the world? And some of them are going to be fairly obvious, like the first ones we'll talk about. Other ones maybe are not so obvious. They're more political or cultural in nature. So really, as you would imagine, one of the very first things that's going to determine whether or not a crop or a type of agriculture will be practiced is going to be the physical environment. And clearly just the way that the world is made and the way that crops and animals survive and things like that, the physical environment is going to play a great role in determining what types of crops are suitable for certain types of environments. And so when we look at different features of the physical environment, you look at things like soil and soil types. Certain types of plants grow well in certain types of soil. So the soil is not there in terms of the type that it needs, whether it's sandy or whether it's thick or whether it has it's a certain level of acidity, whether it is certain types of nutrients are found in the soil, then a plant may or may not be able to grow in that particular area. Whether we're talking about if the soil has the nutrients that are available, and one of the problems with agriculture is potential for over-farming. So if the soil loses those nutrients, then the crops are not going to be able to be grown there. I talk about relief, and relief is kind of the shape and the lay of the land, the altitudes and the pitch of the land. And this is going to have a great impact on different types of plants as well, dealing with how much sun a plant might get over time, the runoff of the water and whether or not the water sits in an area and kind of pools and keeps the soil moist, or whether the water kind of evaporates from the soil relatively quickly. In altitude as well, certain plants are not going to thrive very well in high levels of altitude, whereas others might. And of course, then dealing with levels of oxygen and temperature changes and things along those lines. And then clearly things like climate. How much rainfall does an area receive? What is the temperature throughout? What is the temperature found throughout the region on a regular basis? All of these are going to be really important to the different types of agriculture that are practiced in a particular area. Now, of course, this is referring specifically to the types of crops that are grown or the animals that are raised in a particular area, not necessarily whether it would be considered commercial or subsistence agriculture. Again, that is going to primarily be determined based on what type of country we find the agricultural practice in. For the most part, in a less developed country, you find subsistence levels of agriculture, or subsistence examples of agriculture, whereas in more developed countries, you find commercial forms of agriculture, with the exception being Mediterranean agriculture as well as plantation agriculture. So again, those are some of the more obvious things, and I think this map here is helpful because if we look at the different types of agricultural practices that we discuss in terms of the types of plants that are grown and things like that, you can look at these different climate zones and you can kind of get a good idea for why maybe certain areas in the world are not hospitable to growing crops or raising animals. Now, some other things that maybe we don't think about kind of at first, but we might, as we begin to kind of sit down and consider it makes sense, are things like cultural elements to it. Some cultures either are or are not going to accept the growing of certain types of plants or animals. And this primarily refers directly to animal production and animal consumption. For the most part, most plants, with the exception of maybe drug-related plants, things like poppy and things like marijuana and things along those lines, or cocoa, for the most part, plants are not really seen as an affront to any cultural elements. But for the most part, if you have, again, most of the affront is going to be towards the raising and consumption of a particular animal. And these are the fairly standard examples. In Hinduism, the cow is a sacred animal, and so people are not going to be raising cows for meat production. Now, cows are used for milk, cows can be used for work, those types of things, but they're not going to be slaughtered for their meat. In Islamic and Jewish countries and cultures, the pig is considered an unclean animal. And those are really two kind of opposite sides of the coin, whereas the cow is considered sacred, the pig is considered unholy or unclean. And so you're not going to find pigs or pig raising, or the consumption of ham, or those types of things in Jewish and Islamic cultures and countries. Some maybe some things that are a little closer to home are horses. In the United States, the consumption of horse is not something that we do on a regular basis. Now, it was actually illegal until a couple of years ago to process and manufacture horse meat in the United States. You could actually consume it, but you couldn't process it here in the United States, which that's one of those things that makes it a little difficult to consume if it's not being processed. But just recently, because this is in the last couple of years, because of the economic recession, and I saw an article a couple of years ago that was talking about how because of the recession, people were not able to take care of the horses. They were turning the horses loose, and so the federal government loosened up restrictions on the production of meat, of horse meat. And the same thing applies in the United States. Things like cows, things like dogs and cats and rodents of various kinds. Those are not typically things that we consider to be part of our normal consumption, our normal diet, and so that would be considered taboo. And so those are going to keep us from raising those particular animals in our country. Then there is also political factors. Governments are going to favor typically the production of either a particular animal or a particular crop for a variety of different reasons. Whether it has a good lobby, like in our country, K Street, if it has a nice lobby that lobbies for the production of a particular animal or crop. I think corn is a great example of this. The ethanol lobby, or I guess it's the ethanol lobby, I'm not really sure who it is that pushes for it, or the environmental lobby really pushes for ethanol. And so because of government subsidies towards ethanol, farmers are converting over to corn, and so that's going to encourage the production of corn. You also have things like control prices. A great example of the United States is control price of milk. The government places a price floor on milk, and so we never really see the real price of milk. More than likely, milk is higher than it should be, and the idea there is you're trying to support the milk and the dairy producers. Now, of course, dairy production is important to us, and we want to make sure that dairy farmers are making enough money. But again, the question then is, at what cost to the American consumer, and even in the international markets, if you create that price floor and you subsidize milk production and those types of things. Specialized loan programs, whether you have reduced loans for farmers or whether you have agricultural subsidies where farmers are paid to either produce or not produce. This was several years ago. In Georgia specifically, peanut farmers, the price of peanuts on the market apparently was very, very far down. Peanut farmers were going to have a hard time making a profit, so the government actually paid peanut farmers in Georgia to not sell their peanuts, to just keep them in their barns and let them rot and go to waste. Okay, those are types of farm subsidies. Again, the idea there is encourages the farmer to continue planting and still make money, kind of regardless of market or environmental, not I guess environmental conditions, but mainly market conditions. And governments might also encourage the production of certain seed types and seed varieties based on what might be more conducive to growing in that particular region, whether maybe it is something about they want to keep a particular seed variety in a particular country and they don't want to introduce foreign seed varieties because of the fear that you might have kind of a cross population of seed varieties and these types of things. And so governments might favor certain seed varieties, or they might subsidize the production or the purchase of certain genetically modified seeds, so that the farmers can be more productive, or they can get a better crop, or they can the GMOs and those types of things. Just Google the word Monsanto's, or you can go watch Food Inc. or King Corn or any of these things, and you'll see all this publicity and things about how bad Monsanto's is. I don't need to go into that, but you certainly can find it out there. I'm not telling you whether I think Monsanto's is bad or not, but there's certainly plenty of things out there that talk to you about from that angle. In fact, you're not going to find much that talk positively about Monsanto's. But anyway, moving on. Some other things that might determine crops that are being grown is if a crop is a national treasure for a particular country, like in France. And we talked, and you saw this probably in your textbook, in the culture region. where certain wines in certain regions in France are really well known for their wines and their grape production. And so the government actually protects that land and won't let people do anything else with that land except for grow grapes. In fact, some of the land is actually more valuable for the property or the land itself, not necessarily for the grape production, but the government will not allow anything else to happen there. And so this encourages farmers to continue grape production. Same thing with Germany and hops. Similar situation, hops used in the production of beer. And hops are part of kind of the national heritage and culture of Germany, and so the government is going to ensure that those things continue. There are other things, of course, economic factors. Farmers are going to decide based on the purchase price. What are crops selling for this particular year? Is it soybean? Is it corn? Is it wheat? If I'm a cattle farmer, but I can make more money off of corn because of subsidies or whatever, then I get rid of my cattle and I plant corn. Or if I can get more for soybean than corn this year, then I plant soybean. So that's going to be an important decision maker. Coffee beans. In the recent past, we've seen kind of an uptick in the price of coffee beans. I've seen different things over the years. Coffee beans went back down, and so people started tearing up their coffee trees, and so to kind of to decide to plant different types of crops. So coffee's kind of all over the place. In the recent past, it's gone up because of kind of global consumption of coffee because of the Starbucks culture, but then I saw it go back down. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but it seems to have ticked back up. I saw in the Wall Street Journal just a couple of months ago. I've been talking about corn. Again, the encouragement to purchase or to plant corn primarily for ethanol production, which drives up the cost of a lot of the things. Not only does it drive up the cost of gasoline because you're increasing the cost of the production of gasoline, but you increase the cost of beef because there are fewer cows, because feed is more expensive, and farmers are having a harder time raising cattle because that's more expensive. But again, farmers might be encouraged to plant corn. You have things like the cost of the farm and the cost of the land itself. And so this is going to be more of the actual placement of the farm in relationship to other areas. So if the land is more expensive, and we'll talk about this in the urban unit, as you get closer to cities, land becomes more expensive. So if it's more expensive, the farmer might sell that land, move further out, or he might just raise the prices of his product, those types of things. So these are economic factors. And remember, well, first of all, I guess you might say this only applies to commercial farmers. But if they're commercial farmers, this is an important point because they're trying to make money off of their product. And lastly, one of the things that's really impacting farm locations today, and actually looking at new areas of farm locations, are new technologies that are being developed. Specifically, this technology of hydroponics, which the idea of hydroponics is pretty much you're just growing plants in a liquid and nutrient solution. So you don't necessarily need large amounts of land or even land that has viable soil conditions. You just need space and water with the nutrients in it, as far as I understand it, and the crops will grow. One of the things they're trying to do in Southeast Asian countries is vertical gardening. And so you can see an example of that here, where you have the plants on trays and the trays rotate throughout the day to get enough sunlight. So we're taking care, we're moving into vertical space instead of horizontal space. Very similar to what we've done with buildings in high density areas. So these are some new technologies that allow for people to grow and produce crops in areas that before were not viable. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I appreciate you watching. When we come back next time, we'll be talking about von Thunen's model, and a very important model. More than likely, you're going to see a question about this on the AP test, so I hope to see you next time.